Hello, and welcome to the video. This river looks just like any other river in England. However, this is the river down which King Athelstan paddleboarded when he was fleeing the invading armies of the Welsh Scourge. This video is the story of that humiliating and shambolic retreat. And why now? With hindsight, it's considered one of the best shambolic and humiliating retreats in history. 1172 was an interesting year in the history of England. The Normans, who had been ruling the country for over 100 years at that point, all decided that they were going to go on holiday at the same time. And so, King Athelstan returned to claim the crown in one of the most surprising comebacks in political history, ever since Harold III revealed that he had also been Harold I and Harold II as well. Surprising for some, but a deeply embarrassing oversight for the royal portrait artist, who had managed to paint 3 identical pictures of the same king 3 times over, without ever realizing it was the same man in the same robes on the same throne. That artist was later sentenced to the gallows when it was revealed that he had sold to the French all of England's secrets about how to make marshmallows, an invention which some attribute to the ancient Egyptians, although in reality it was actually created by Thomas the Recliner when he was tasked by Duke Happenstance to develop the most bland and disappointing confectionery possible in order for the Duke to be able to disappoint a French noble who was visiting him at the time. However, Baron de Lyon, being a French noble and a contrarian by nature, insisted he was delighted with the confectionery and he demanded to know the recipe. A recipe which neither Thomas nor the Duke were willing to provide. And that, of course, was one of the main triggers for the 35-and-a-half-year war. Nevertheless, back to the story of King Athelstan and his humiliating and shambolic retreat, paddleboarding along the river. King Athelstan had returned to claim the crown, although he was met by a broad range of wildly different opinions about his return. Some lauded his arrival as the savior of England. Some were horrified that a king who had been dead for 2 centuries had returned to claim the throne. And some, in fact many, seemed genuinely indifferent to the whole affair and only seemed to show any reaction at all when the king reached out his skeletal hand to touch their bodies, at which point they would often recoil, or else an unpleasant grimace would fall upon their face. However, in the absence of many other monarch, King Athelstan was granted the crown. Now, 1172 was also one of the very rare occasions during the Scourge of the Welsh where a temporary peace treaty was agreed between the English and the Welsh Scourge, allowing both sides to rebuild their armies and to recover any towns that had been stolen or moved to new locations during the war. Of course, the Welsh always kept their armies in practice even during times of a peace treaty by launching constant aggressive raids into English territory, which were, by and large, met by the English with a fond degree of nostalgia before all of the chopping and slicing began, at which point they were seen less favorably once again. King Athelstan, looking to assure his place on the throne, sought to break the peace treaty with the Welsh and to drive them out, although where to he never fully specified. However, King Athelstan's dream of a mighty English army finally quashing the scourge of the Welsh quickly turned into a nightmare. The first incursion saw hundreds of English soldiers killed by the Welsh scourge, some standing as tall as 10 or 12 feet and all with greenish skin and hulking muscular bodies. To say it was a disaster would be an understatement. Bishop Cranthorne at the time described the whole situation as a clatterclapper, although he wasn't very good with words and some people think he was trying to say cataclysm. Although, either way, he was right. The first minor incursion into Welsh territory was enough to break the peace treaty, and within days, all of the towns and cities along the English border were being raided by the deadly scourge. Hereford fled from where it had used to be, just outside Monmouth, and moved to the location where it is still situated to this day. And as every child in Hereford knows, when they moved the town, they took the ford with them, just to spite the Welsh. Hereford received a very brutal sacking in the raids that followed the breakdown of the peace treaties, and the people of Hereford appealed to King Athelstan to protect them. And so King Athelstan raised an army and marched them to meet the deadly Welsh scourge, here in the famous field of the humbling defeat. King Athelstan's army contained 20,000 bowmen, 5,000 cavalry, and 100,000 soldiers, mostly made of regulars, some irregulars, and some very, very irregulars. The Welsh made short work of them all, destroying the entire English army in an afternoon, and even stopping for lunch around noon or midday, although exact reports to the specific time vary from source to source. Knowing the battle was lost, King Athelstan fled the field of humbling defeat in humbling defeat, prompting many to ask the question why he had chosen to hold the battle in a location that had already carried such a pessimistic name centuries before the battle with the Welsh. Hubris? Arrogance? Or just a quirky sense of humor? No one will ever be able to tell. What we can be certain of is that King Athelstan fled the battlefield in a shockingly well-prepared escape plan that he executed with almost perfect incompetence. Petrified and disguised as a swan to help evade capture, he paddleboarded his way along this river, pursued by hordes of the Welsh scourge. Reports at the time suggested he was screaming like a little girl, and that he managed to take so many wrong turns, somehow he managed to fall over 3 waterfalls, even though there were only 2 waterfalls on this river. In fact, he took so many wrong turns that nowadays modern historians believe that he must have been paddleboarding upstream by mistake. Which is why the Welsh scourge found it so very easy to capture him and cut off his head. However, the very fact that they had been able to capture and execute an English king was enough to quell the bloodlust of the terrifying scourge of the Welsh. And so they retreated back behind their borders, and everything in England returned to normal just before the Normans came back from their holidays. Which is, as I'm sure you can imagine, why the Norman rulers found it so surprising that the peace treaties with the Welsh had been broken and that now all of their towns and cities were being raided and razed to the ground by hordes of the deadly Welsh scourge all over the country. But of course the question remains, why now do modern historians look back and consider this one of the best humiliating and shambolic retreats in history? Well, the answer to that is very simple. The turmoil created by the scourge of the Welsh and the very fact that they pursued King Athelstan south allowed Brian Burkeface the opportunity to seize control in the north of England and to establish the Burkeface dynasty. A dynasty that would eventually come to blows in the Battle of the Burkefaces, a conflict which would split the family in two into the Burkes and the Burkefaces, 2 sides which were both instrumental in the outcome of the Banana Wars. And so, that is the reason why modern historians consider the retreat to be of such significance. Also, around that time, the Welsh scourge burned down Ipswich, and historians always consider that to be a good thing. Not my personal opinion, you understand? Just the facts that I make of myself. However, the real reason that Ipswich attracts the ire of so many historians, well, that's a story for another day. Hello, and welcome to the end of the video. I'd like to take a few moments to talk to you about why you should like and subscribe. A lot of other channels just tell you to do it, but I'd like to give you a few well-considered and thoughtful reasons as to why you should hit that like button. Just do it.